Astrophotography has come so far in just the last 5 years. We have mono cameras that push over 91% quantum efficiency and color cameras that push over 80% quantum efficiency. We have harmonic drive mounts. We have software to help us do quick and precision polar alignments, and software that can plate solve and automatically point a telescope toward an object. We even have mini PCs capable of handling massive amounts of information captured through the night. But I think one of the biggest and best changes that's happened in just the last few years is that we can pretty much eliminate noise from astrophotography. I know there are some persons that argue that noise should be there, that removing it gives images a bit of an artificial or plasticky look, but honestly, I would argue in the opposite direction because our eyes do not see noise, and if you want to test this, wait until it's dark and turn out the lights. Then light a candle and look around you. Things might be very dim. Objects might be so faint that you can barely make them out. But you're not going to see anything approximating analog or digital noise, because our eyes just don't work that way. So to me, it's entirely realistic to try to remove any and all noise from an image, and we have all kinds of incredible strategies to do that these days. Cooled cameras reduce dark current noise. Dithering gets rid of walking noise. Increasing total integration time improves the signal-to-noise ratio. And modern camera sensors produce much less read noise than they used to. Overall, all astrophotography has greatly improved in its ability to handle noise, to the point we can virtually eliminate the appearance of noise in any image. But one of the most useful and fundamental strategies for eliminating noise is to use gain. Gain in astrophotography terms is the equivalent of what would be thought of as increasing ISO in ordinary photography terms. Let's take a moment and talk about what gain is. Before we jump into that, I just want to take a moment and note that, as a rule, I prefer to avoid jargon. There was a psychologist in the 20th century named William Glasser who created a form of psychotherapy called reality therapy, and he wrote a book in the 1970s by that very name. Glasser was always a person who preferred clear, plain English, and he was vocal about his disdain for unnecessary jargon. Now, he worked in the era when Freudian and Jungian psychology were all the rage, and those forms of psychology were filled with nonsense concepts that were equally filled with nonsense psychobabble. Concepts like anal retentive personalities, working through issues of the id and ego and superego, Electra and Oedipus complexes, and a lot of other nonsense that didn't hold up under scientific scrutiny. And Glasser at one point had brutally criticized his colleagues in psychology by saying, look, you just use that psychobabble because you feel like it makes you sound smart. Other people don't know what it means, so you can explain it to them and make yourself sound clever, right? But really, you know, it's about as useful as a horoscope. And I've always really appreciated Glasser's no-nonsense approach. As well, another inspirational figure of mine is Carl Sagan, a brilliant astronomer and educator from the middle and latter 20th century, who also was known for using plain English to communicate complex topics. In so doing, was able to bring knowledge of deep scientific concepts to the world. To be honest, I much prefer their approaches. But we are diving into a fairly technical topic today, so some jargon will be necessary. I will do my best to keep it to a minimum and keep it frank and comprehensible though. So, let's first look at what is gain. Ordinary photographers would know gain as ISO adjustment, though neither term really explains what it is. Gain, in digital photography, is modifying the effect of each photon that makes contact with the camera's digital sensor. When photons make contact with the silicon of a camera sensor, they are converted into electrons. The electrons are stored as an electrical value conveying information in each pixel. For example, let's say a photographer is taking a picture. An exposure time is selected, and during the space of that exposure time, the camera sensor will be sensitive to photons. Now the sensor is made of billions of photosites, or pixels. For simplicity going forward, I'm just going to refer to them as pixels. Over the pixels is a thin layer of silicon, which converts photons that come into contact with it into electrons. Every time a photon makes contact with a camera pixel, it is converted into an electron and stored in the pixel as an electrical value. When the exposure time is over, the camera will read the electrical charge stored in each pixel and assign each pixel a brightness based on its electrical charge. Then we'll reset all the pixels, and during the next exposure, the same process will happen again. Gain amplifies the electrical charge stored in each pixel before it's read out to the camera circuitry. For example, if one electron stored in the pixel represents 1 unit of electrical value, and the gain is set to double that, then that electrical value might be worth 2 units. If the gain is set to triple that electrical value might be worth 3 units, and so on. The information stored in each pixel is conveyed by its brightness. A pixel that stored no electrons would be pure black. A pixel that was full of electrons at its maximum charge would be white. However, most pixels are going to be some shade of gray in between. Pixels that have a low electrical value will be a dark gray, but the higher a pixel's electrical value, the brighter or lighter gray it will appear. Gain is introduced at this point to amplify the electrical charge contained in the pixels, thus strengthening the overall signal. The signal in the sensor is then read out into the camera circuitry. It's at this point that the electrical noise in the circuitry can be introduced into the signal. This is what read noise is. The noise of the camera's own electrical operation is introduced into the information that was captured in the sensor after gain has been applied when it's read into the camera. Because astrophotographers tend to create images over multiple hours, sometimes spanning multiple nights, weeks, or even months, most of us tend to be aware of a concept called signal-to-noise ratio. We're well aware that noise comes from many places. Noise is partly the result of a lack of signal or information, that is, a lack of the total information from the objects that we're trying to image. As I've said in previous videos, noise is what fills the spaces between the information. That noise comes from heat within the sensor. That kind of noise is known as dark current. Noise comes from space, such as the cosmic rays that sometimes interact with our sensors. Noise called walking noise can result from how images are guided through the night. And the read noise is what gets into our images through the camera's own electronics. And there are strategies to deal with each of these different kinds of noise. And apart from simply producing better electronic circuits that produce less noise, gain is perhaps the most effective strategy for dealing with read noise. The reason is because gain amplifies the electrical signal stored in the pixels before they are read out to the circuitry. When the electrical signal is read out to the circuitry, the signal is converted into digital units in the analog to digital converter. And this is where the noise from the circuitry, the read noise, is introduced. By increasing the gain, one is increasing the power of the signal, making the signal greater against a fixed value of read noise. So, as an oversimplified example, let's say that your signal was worth 3 and your read noise was worth 1. But if you double the gain or double the amplification of the signal, then now your signal is worth 6, but your read noise is still only worth 1. And if you triple the gain, then your signal is now worth 9, but your read noise signal still is only worth 1. But everything in every kind of photography is a compromise, and one cannot simply just add gain forever. Be great if we could, eh? But we can't because, among other things, each pixel can only hold a certain amount of charge, which is sometimes known as its full well depth or just well depth. And remember that the brightness value of each pixel depends on its charge. In a 14-bit camera, such as my Player One Aries M with a Sony IMX533 sensor, a pixel can have 16,384 different levels of charge. This is because the decimal numeric value of 14 bits is 16,384. So the pixels of a 14-bit camera can display a wide range of shades of gray, all the way from full black at 0 to full bright or white at 16,384. This is the camera's dynamic range. And if I use gain to double the electrical value of each electron in each pixel, then I have to divide its dynamic range by 2, reducing its potential shades of gray to 8,192. If I triple the gain, I have to divide by 3. If I quadruple the gain, I have to divide by 4, and so on. Dynamic range is very important. Cameras need wide dynamic range to show smooth and true transitions between the dark and the bright regions of an image. And dynamic range is especially important in trying to show subtle differences in shadow and detail in complex areas, such as deep within nebulae. When the dynamic range is flattened by increasing gain too much, images will develop an over-contrasted, crunchy look. As you can see, gain can be effectively used for managing read noise, but you cannot simply turn it up indiscriminately. There is a myth that floats around astrophotography that the best astrophotography is done at 0 gain. It's not widespread, but I see it come up now and again. There are times where indeed you may want to use 0 gain, but I find that's only when you're shooting bright objects, maybe with high dynamic range. And the only DSO I can think of that bright offhand is the Great Orion Nebula. The central region of that nebula, the Trapezium cluster, is so bright in contrast to some of the fainter subjects around it, that the astrophotographer is forced to either turn gain down to 0 or use very short exposure times, or perhaps both. But most astro camera manufacturers actually have a gain that they are hoping that you will use your cameras at because they give you the best compromise between well depth and dynamic range. That setting is sometimes called unity gain. However, it's not correct to call it unity gain, and I myself, I've called that setting unity gain for years and years, and only learned it was an inappropriate term in the course of researching this video. Unity gain is a specific setting where the sensor's amplification is set so that 1 electron equals 1 digital unit, or ADU. In other words, it's a 1-to-1 mathematical ratio between the physical signal of an electron and the digital output. 1 electron, 1 ADU. The place where camera manufacturers generally expect us and perhaps want us to set our cameras is at the high conversion gain point. This is a bit different from one camera to another. On my Player One Aries M, it's 125. The high conversion gain point, or HCG, will be related in the camera specs. These are the specs for the Player One Aries M. I'm just using this as an example because I've used the Aries M for years. It's my absolute most favorite astro camera, and I'm extremely familiar with it, both what works best, what doesn't work, its ins and outs. So I often use it as an example camera. Not that I'm not saying it's the best camera out there, it's just the camera that I know and it's my favorite, so I frequently use it as an example. On this chart, in the section called Readout Noise, the high conversion gain, or HCG, is clearly delineated. You can see here that on the Player One Aries M, it's 125. It will be different from one camera to another, even if the camera is made by the same maker. For example, on the Player One Uranus M Pro, it is designated as 210, but in a different part of the chart, right up here at the top. And you can see the effects of going into HCG mode in the readout section of the chart, and also the dynamic range section of the chart. We're still looking at the Uranus Pro charts here, but I'll switch back to the Aries M charts now. We can see the effects of the HCG mode in the sudden drop-off in read noise, and the sudden increase in dynamic range. On the Player One Aries M, when I raise the gain to 125, I get a sudden improvement in dynamic range. It goes from 12.625, just prior to increasing to HCG, to 13.564 after increasing to HCG. And that almost parallels the full dynamic range, 13.996, to be found at zero gain. And for that very small price in dynamic range, we get a significant improvement in reduction of readout noise. In the readout noise section of the graph, you can see that at zero gain, readout noise was 4.46. And just prior to going to HCG mode, readout noise was 2.866. But after going into HCG mode, readout noise was 1.376. Astro cameras within HCG mode have special circuitry designed to make use of a limited amount of gain increase in such a way as preserves the camera's well depth and dynamic range. Such cameras automatically switch to that circuitry once they cross the HCG gain threshold. As you can see, there is a significant advantage in shooting pretty much all the time in HCG mode. Using this mode conserves almost all the camera's dynamic range while providing for excellent read noise reduction. The only exception I can think of that would justify not using this mode would be shooting a very bright, high dynamic range object. So what we see is that increasing your gain is one of your most powerful tools for combating read noise. And in particular, if your camera has a high conversion gain mode, and many if not most modern astro cameras do, then the ideal place to put your gain is at the HCG threshold. You could push it higher, but that has rapidly diminishing returns. Because continuing to push gain up won't allow you to capture more light, it'll just amplify the signal more, which means what photons you have will appear brighter in each sub, but at a significant cost to dynamic range. But pushing gain enough to activate the HCG mode and no more is probably the closest you're going to get in any kind of photography to a no-compromise win-win situation as possible. Typically, what I do with my Player One Aries M is I set 5 points over the HCG just to make sure the camera consistently registers as in the HCG mode. So normally I set my camera to 130 gain. And that's something you might want to consider with your camera, just setting a few points over the recommended HCG mode. Just a few, 3 to 5 points maybe. It's a win-win scenario. You maintain your full well, you get brighter subs, and you get the best read noise protection. I hope that helps you in your quest to understand your astro camera, what it does, and how it works so that you can make the most of it. And if these videos are doing their job, they'll help you to get better results in your astrophotography. Now, have a blast doing astrophotography and get out there and shoot the sky.